If you watched the TV series Once Upon a Time with the idyllic township of Storybrook and/or the more bloody show Grimm, you'd be forgiven to think that Twistplay's Torn Tales is somehow related to them. It's a similar premise, but a very different fairy tale. A review key was provided by Twistplay and Chilled Mouse, and the game was played primarily on a Mac. Let's start with the first thing you encounter when getting into Torn Tales: the story. An old man known as the Bookbinder is basically upset that no one reads his stories and he gets no fame, money or adoring fans. And so he sets out to rewrite the classical fairy tales. If this story is ever made into a movie, his character will clearly be played by Shia LaBeouf. The whole story is told in narrative segments inserted in between the various levels and only sparsely supported by encounters in the game. Most of what the player will be doing is completely unrelated to the story. This is also the main failing of the game. You control a trio of fairy tale characters as they walk through the twisted lands in the Bookbinder's world and kill everything they meet. Yup, not really much dialogue or anything to support your actions, just walk until you find a group of hostiles and chop chop. The combat itself even feels disconnected, like no actions you take really matter. To test this, just ignore the computer when you get into a fight and then check back in a couple of minutes later to see that you won. Some fights do benefit from you moving around a bit and positioning the Dr. Jekyll Mr. Hyde character as a tank, but it's trivial to revive characters, so don't worry if somebody goes down for the count. Even when you do everything you can, it is a somewhat empty feeling, as there's no real visceral or kinetic feedback. The character is a hidden enemy, but nothing really happens beyond a number changing somewhere. The result of this is that combat, exploration, basically most everything in between the narrative quicktime events seems nugatory, as if only one side of the game was fleshed out. I should point out that while most encounters can be done blindfolded and juggling green apples, the boss fights generally deserve more or even require a bit of attention. If nothing else, then because there may be a need to react to a narrative segment right after them. As a role-playing game, even if it is an ARPG, it includes the usual stats, skills and loot as one would expect. Here you'll do well to simply accept that Dr. Jekyll is a tank, Robin Hood is the DPSer, and preferably at range, Snow White is a healer and ranged damage dealer, and then select skills to match that. Eventually you'll have gone through and selected every skill, so there's not too much to worry about in terms of endgame setup. As for affecting the story, i.e. playing a role, there's less of it than some might like, hence the reference to it as an ARPG. It would have been interesting to have more character options, and see the story develop depending on who you pick up, as opposed to the current setup of just the 3 characters. Some of the graphics are very well done, especially during the narrative segments, and the style is overall quite interesting and competent. Snow White is neither a teensy girl nor a hypersexualized female fighter, but instead looks like a competent fairy tale character. Robin Hood and Dr. Jekyll look largely as one might expect, and the game avoids outright grotesqueries. The sceneries, the maps are generally okay, even nice, but a bit bland and repetitive. Unfortunately, due to how the characters' levels progress relatively to those of the enemies, you'll find yourself traversing each map multiple times, and it quickly blurs out. The game could definitely benefit from more smaller maps and more variation in the decorations of the maps, including some better tombstone descriptions. The sounds, ignoring the game music for a moment, are best described as almost functional. Sometimes there appear to be glitches keeping some sound effects from playing, but when they do play, they're not really descriptive. You can't tell what's going on simply from listening to the game, and this leaves out an important venue for providing feedback to the player. Sure, wolf howls means there are wolves, and you'll eventually pick up what some of the combat sounds mean, but it's less than intuitive overall. Music in the game follows an orchestral or ensemble setup with ample drums to set the mood for combat and challenge, but isn't particularly exceptional in any way. The occasional lone violin, however, does provide a very good, albeit common job, of setting the scene at certain points. The game is out for Windows PC, Mac OS and Linux, but playing the game, I'm constantly thinking this could just as well have been played on a tablet. The UI comes across as designed at least in part for touchscreens, and the gameplay is simple enough to be played during a commute to work. That said, it might be too much of a stretch to run it on a smartphone. Torn Tales is functional as an ARPG, the story and setting is interesting in itself, but it is let down by average at best implementation in some areas. If you like classical fairy tales and ARPG, definitely give the game a try, and I'm certainly hoping that Twistplay will revisit the world with new characters and settings, more dialogues and options for the players. Bamses are rating this game a 5.4 out of 10. Functional.